Hello again. So this is going to be our last video lecture of the term. You may rejoice in that. I have noticed something over the years that strikes me as interesting, understandable, but still not maybe wise, which is that the more difficult a poem is, the less people talk about it, and the easier it is, the more people talk about it. So a poem like Parker's Resume got an awful lot of chatter about it, but a poem like, in this case, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird tends to be one that people avoid. But the more difficult a poem is, probably the more you want to talk about it. So that's the principle that I've gone with when I've made these lectures, and I've chosen just 3 to talk about today. There are other poems that could use some conversation, but I'm going to let you get us started on those. And I'm going to start with the one that I think is the most fun, but that does give students more initial problems than others. Boy, that looks kind of small. All right, so this is a little more readable than the last. So this was by T.S. Eliot, who is perhaps the most important English language poet of the 20th century, and that depends who you talk to, but he certainly is right up there. The beginning of it is in Italian. You can see it's a stanza from Dante. I don't read Italian, but I know that it says essentially that if I had any thought that you down here in hell would be able to go to the upper world and tell my story, then I would not tell you, but since no one ever leaves hell, I don't have to worry, so I will tell you my story. It's an interesting epigraph for this poem because the fact that it's in Italian kind of elevates the poem and makes us think this must be some really significant poem. We start with Dante. In some ways it is a significant poem, but it's about a very trivial thing, and that's kind of typical of the 20th century. It's a dramatic monologue, but it's a dramatic monologue in which the speaker is talking to himself. And so it's unlike anything that Robert Browning ever wrote. When he says in that first line, "Let us go then, you and I," there's only one person here. He's talking to himself. So I'll just read it one stanza at a time. I think this took 11 slides, and comment on each. And I won't go into great detail. There will be plenty for you still to talk about in the discussion board, but this will give you the background that you need to talk about it. Let us go then, you and I, while the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent, to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit. So Prufrock wants to go somewhere. We don't yet know where that is. It's on the other side of these streets. There's sexuality suggested in these streets. But notice he wants to go while the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table, like a patient put asleep on a table. And it's hard to tell whether that line explains how he will go, or whether it explains how the evening is spread out against the sky. I mean, it really applies to both. But, you know, a patient asleep on a table is hardly the way to go wherever he's going. So he wants to go through these half-deserted streets the restless retreats of the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. So that suggests, one-night stands, cheap sex. And sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Oysters are an aphrodisiac. Streets that fall like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. This question is going to preoccupy him throughout the poem. So that's the agenda he has proposed for himself, to go somewhere. We don't yet know where. Now he's already there in stanza 2, at least in his imagination, whether he's there, or slide 2 I should say, whether he's there in fact or just in his imagination, there's no way to tell. He may never leave his room, for all we know. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and, seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Where he's going is a place where women come and go talking of Michelangelo. What it is a party with high-class women and high-class people, intellectuals, people with money, people in the upper crust of society, people that Prufrock is part of, but doesn't feel he's part of. Well, now you can imagine whatever you want in this next stanza. Maybe he's looking out the window of his apartment, maybe he's walking down the streets he mentioned in the last slide, but he's processing what he sees into the metaphor of a cat. Right, the yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes. And so he says, no, I got even a better idea. The yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes. So he's rewriting himself as he goes along. Pursues this image of a cat, fog as a cat that circles around the house and falls asleep. Something you can talk about. Slide 3. We're getting an understanding of his mind, how his mind works. And that's really, the whole poem is about how his mind works. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. So here's the high, formal, metaphoric language of Prufrock being undercut by the thing that he's going to do. I mean, he's got these big ideas, big words, big language, murder and create. That comes from a poem, a 17th century poem. And but what's he going to do? He's going to take toast and tea. So he's indecisive, right? There will be time for 100 indecisions and 100 visions and revisions. He's indecisive about this question he wants to ask. He doesn't want you to ask, what is it? He doesn't want to ask himself, what is it? But there's a question that's bugging him, and there will be time for 100 indecisions, visions, and revisions before the taking of toast and tea. So I'll break the suspense here. He wants to ask a girl out. Right? He wants to, one of these women that come and go talking of Michelangelo, he's got his eye on one of them. He wants to ask her out. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. That's the refrain. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair, with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounted firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a moment there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. So again, high language. He's really dressed in the most dapper, elegant, stylish way. His morning coat mounting firmly to the chin. His necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. He is dressed to the nines, but he's also very self-conscious. He's dressed to kill, right? But he's imagining that. They won't see his clothes. They'll see he's bald. They'll see he's thin. And he equates asking the girl out with disturbing the universe. And since he puts it in such inflated terms, it's going to make it very hard to actually do it. So he's not only doing something, but imagining people watching him do it. And that's paralyzing to him. For I have known them all already, known them all. Have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? We've got more of the same here. He's imagining people looking at him and fixing him in a formulated phrase, like putting a pin through a bug and pinning it on the wall as a specimen. So what's the formulated phrase? Well, it could be anything like, oh, he's just an intellectual. He's a poet. Right? Whatever. He's the kind of guy who can't figure out what to wear to a party. Whatever the phrase is. They fix you in that, and that's who you are from then on. Right? That's what he's afraid of. He's worried these women are going to decide, loser, and then there's nothing he can do or say to overcome that. It would be like he's pinned to the wall, and an insect pinned to the wall can't ask a woman for a date. And I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted in white and bare, but in the lamplight down with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl? And how should I presume, and how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves, leaning out of windows? I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. So he's imagining that he's known these women already and there's nothing new there. We don't believe him. He's thinking of the hair on their arms. He's smelling the perfume in his imagination or in reality. I don't think it really matters. But when he elevates the women that he wants to talk to and denigrates himself and speaks in these highfalutin terms, then he doesn't know how to presume. He doesn't know how to begin. So here's an option. Maybe he'll talk about the poetic image he came up with early in the poem, the dusk that's like a cat. But he gives up on that immediately and says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Life would have been easier if I was a lobster. In the afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired. Or it malingers, stretched on the floor, here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I've seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short I was afraid. So he equates himself to John the Baptist here, which is kind of ridiculous. He even knows it's ridiculous. I'm no prophet, and here's no great matter. It's just asking a woman on a date. But people will make fun of him. I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, which is, again, a ridiculous image. And would it have been worth it after all, after the cups, the marmalade, the tea? Among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, this is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all. You've seen this line before, to have squeezed the universe into a ball. It's a quotation of Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress. So we can tell from the verb tense, would it have been worth it after all, that he's given up? He's not going to ask the question. He's decided he's too afraid to do it. It won't happen. And he's wondering whether it even would have been worthwhile. He's inflated it to the idea of Lazarus coming back from the dead. But would it have been worth it if she should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all? In other words, would you like to go out with me? You seem to suggest that you might like me. And she says, no, that's not what I meant. You were here, I was talking to you, I didn't mean that at all. Don't get confused. I don't like you in that. You're a nice enough guy, but I don't like you in that way. Right? So it looks like he had some reason to believe the person he wanted to ask out would have said yes, but he doesn't trust himself. And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets? After the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean. But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves and patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all, that is not what I meant at all? Well, he's imagining all of these things, the whole relationship, novels and the teacups and the skirts. As if a magic lantern, this is before movie theaters, when you had just a magic lantern that can throw pictures on a wall through a hole. Live pictures, not filmed pictures. But no, he's suggesting it was too much. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant, Lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times indeed almost ridiculous, almost at times the fool. So the suggestion is he would have to be Hamlet to ask the woman out, but he's no Hamlet. He's just someone else in the play of life, some attendant lord that can get a scene started, but is not meant to be the star. See, he'll never give up talking about his endeavor in these grandiose terms. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I park my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves. combing the white hair of the waves blown back, when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered by the chambers of the sea, by sea-girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us, and we drown. So, he grows old. He's going to wear the bottoms of his trousers rolled. There's this bold statement that at the end of the day, this is what I'm going to do. I can't ask the girl on a date, but I can change the way I wear my trousers. Right? I can comb my hair behind. I can have sort of a comb over, hide that bald spot. Do I dare to eat a peach? That's kind of another sensual image, but it's not really that daring. So he's back in his imagination, like with the cat. Now he's thinking about being on the ocean and listening to mermaids. He's a man who's rich in imagination, but not very good with the real world. He's an image of a poet. And when the human voices wake him, bring him back out of his reverie, out of his imagination, back into the real world, he drowns. You might hear an allusion to the Ode to a Nightingale. And that's it. All right, so let me go to the next slide. So this is Wallace Stevens, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. It's not an easy poem. Wallace Stevens rarely wrote easy poems. This is the same writer who wrote The Snowman and Anecdote of the Jar. This is 13 poems, 13 short poems. They act sort of like haiku. They're not technically haiku, but they act sort of like haiku. And I'm not going to be able to tell you what this poem means or what it's about. There's a lot of people who have a lot of theories about what this poem is about. And there are some excellent ideas out there. But what I think you need to do with this poem is read it stanza by stanza, think about it, and tell me what you see, what you hear, what suggests itself to you, and don't worry about what someone else might interpret of this poem, right? This is one of the poems that actually fits the idea that most of the students in this class came in with, that there's no right interpretation and you can think anything you want. Right? There are such poems, and this is the very first one we've seen that fits that description. That doesn't mean there aren't more interesting and less interesting things that people say about it, but it's beyond that very hard to be definite about this poem. And that's because of the time in which it was written and the theory out of which it was written. You know, there's a lot of early 20th century poetry that actually is that way. The title, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird can be anything. It may be a bird, but it could be any problem. It could be, you know, the problem of who to vote for, the problem of where to live, the problem of what's my brother-in-law really like. It could be any problem at all. Right? The idea is that if you look at something 13 ways, you'll get a completer picture of it than if you look at something only one way. I think what Wallace Stevens actually said is that if you look at it 13 ways, you'll get to the truth. Well, but then isn't 13 kind of an arbitrary number? So what I want to do is just go through a couple of these stanzas and talk about them the way that I talk about them. And then I want to hear in the discussion board the way that you talk about them. And I may be able to point out a thing or two that might help. So, first stanza. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. All right, so what do I see here? I see a huge landscape, 20 snowy mountains. Try to imagine the perspective you have to be able to see at the same time 20 snowy mountains. And then within the 20 snowy mountains, the only thing moving was the eye of the blackbird. Right? Suddenly you're zoomed in on a bird's eyeball. Right? So that's a perspective only God could have. The only thing moving among 20 snowy mountains was the eye of the blackbird. I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. I'm not going to comment on that one at all. The blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. So a pantomime is a show without sound, which imitates, like charades, some idea, some scene. This is definitely a poem about trying to figure things out, and the blackbird is one part of this. It's like a sign that you read along with other signs to come up with the right interpretation. But of what? A man and a woman are one. That's something you've heard before. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. How is that? You tell me. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos. The blackbird whistling or just after. The beauty of inflections, as in language, or the beauty of innuendos. There are inflections and innuendos in this poem. Icicles. Icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass. The shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. The mood traced in the shadow an indecipherable cause. O thin men of Haddam. I will tell you that Stevens explicitly told us that he used the word Haddam because he liked the sound of the word. It has no other meaning than that. It's the name of a town, I believe, in Connecticut. O thin men of Haddam, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the women about you? You can see how this will all turn on what you think the blackbird represents. I know noble accents and lucid, inescapable rhythms, but I know, too, that the blackbird is involved in what I know. When the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. Right? So what the poem comes down to for me is the problem of interpretation, not just the problem of interpreting the poem, but the poem as an emblem of the problem of interpreting the world. Right? So I'm not going to read the next stanzas. You read that and you just think. Just think. All answers are good in this case. All right, so I chose this one again because it's a long poem and students don't tend to talk about it unless I bring it up. Yeats is an Irish poet. He's one of the other great poets of the 20th century, like T.S. Eliot, and was also reluctantly a political poet at times. Easter 1916 marks the Easter Rebellion, right? Notice that we're in World War I by now. And Yeats is part of the Irish nationalist cause, which is a cause of people who want to break away from England and start up an independent Ireland, which did since happen, but had not yet happened. And seeing that England was busy in Europe, some Irish nationalists took over a post office and thought that the distracted English would not stand in their way of trying to set up an Irish republic. However, the English had exactly the opposite reaction. They said, basically, we're very busy in Europe right now, we can't deal with you, so we're going to put you down very quickly and very forcefully, and don't ever do it again. So Yeats saw this with horror and with dismay, but also with a kind of awe. because people that he'd thought were just buffoons and fools became heroes. And he did not want the Irish rebellion to make these heroes come across as idiots. So he created this poem to glorify the Easter Rebellion. So here's his glorification of the Easter Rebellion. I've met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among gray 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head, or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite meaningless words, and thought before I had done of a mocking tale or a jibe to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn. All changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. And he thought his Irish compatriots were just frivolous people like him. We live where motley is worn. Motley's what a jester wears in a Shakespearean play, multicolored clothes, clown clothes. So I thought that we were just a bunch of frivolous, superficial people who told jokes at the club and didn't deal with real life. But then something happened. And he's going to have real people in mind, recognizable. You can look up the information on the poem and find the names of everybody that he is mentioning in this poem. That woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. What voice made sweet than hers when young and beautiful? What voice more sweet than hers when young and beautiful she rode to harriers? This man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. That means he's a poet. This other, helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end, so sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. Yet I number him in the song. He too has resigned his part in the casual comedy. He too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. See, when he resigns his part in the casual comedy, he's saying, I'm no longer going to be the kind of person described here. I'm going to be a hero. So he was a drunken lout, but he rose to the occasion when the Irish cause needed him. Hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud. Minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. The horse hoof slides on the brim, and the horse plashes within it, where long-legged moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. Minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. So hearts with one purpose alone would be people who are completely devoted to the cause of Irish nationalism and have no other interest in life, and they seem to become a stone because they're limited. And this stone is in the midst of all of this life. All the teeming, all the change, the clouds, the stream that are always moving, and this stone is in the middle of it. And he's not generally impressed with someone whose entire being is bent toward a cause like Irish nationalism. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? That is heaven's part. Our part to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. That is but night. What is it but nightfall? No, no, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith. For all that is done and said, we know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse, MacDonagh and McBride, and Connolly and Peirce, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed, changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So this poem might remind you of the poem Anne Askew wrote the night before she died, which was designed to turn her into a martyr. This poem is designed to turn these people who died in the Easter Uprising into martyrs and rally people to their cause. Yeats is a little bit ambivalent about the justness of the cause. He's in favor of Irish nationalism, but he knows that fighting for it can destroy people, people who die and people who live. He's not shy about saying that. But he's celebrating these people nonetheless. So poetry in the 20th century runs the whole gamut, right? From psychological studies like proof rock to political poems like this one, and Yeats wrote many kinds of poems, to modernist experiments in art like Wallace Stevens' poem. I think there's just an awful lot to study in 20th century poetry, and you'll notice that a lot of it is not in free verse. All right, that does it. Hope you had a good semester. We've still got this week to finish up and next week for review. Good luck.